Letter number 5. Genetic testing in the Negev. There is a region of Israel that receives little public attention, the Negev. It is rather distant from parts of the West Bank from whence attacks on Israelis emanate. It is largely desert. It is the location of Israel's super-secret nuclear works at Dimona, and many of its occupants are Bedouin. But I learned that in some quarters interest is intense. The Negev is one of the world's leading centers for genetic research. Despite radically altered nomadic social patterns related to now largely abandoned camel breeding and sheep herding, Israel's Bedouin population, some 70,000, continue to practice lineage endogamy. That is, they marry other Bedouins related by clan, often in arranged unions with cousins. The consequence is a higher than random incidence of genetic abnormalities. For the past 12 years, Ben-Gurion University has sponsored the Genetic Research Institute at Soroka in the Negev. According to the Institute's acting director, Dr. Ohad Burke, who also heads the genetics laboratory at Ben-Gurion, about 65% of the Bedouin marry within the family. The effort at Soroka involves a tandem operation, a clinic offering counseling, and across the road, a DNA library with roughly 2,000 samples collected from Bedouin families. The goal of the DNA collection is to identify genes related to hereditary diseases. Among the 16 genes and dozens of mutations, the causes of hereditary mental retardation, early mortality, deafness, and congenital glaucoma have been uncovered. 2 patents, one related to obesity and another to bone density, have been issued. Dr. Burke sees a reciprocity. There's a real desire to help and a daily effort to this effect. We help them. They help us with the research. The research generates little controversy. Counseling draws some fire. The Institute offers 2 kinds. When a couple comes in prior to marriage, tests are recommended to determine if the individuals carry genes increasing the risk that offspring will be abnormal. When both do, then the couple is informed of the situation. The other form of counseling is extended to pregnant couples. Then the goal is detection of genetic abnormalities in the fetus. Pregnancy is terminable under Israeli rules within 120 days of conception. According to Dr. Burke, among other things, this enterprise is of benefit to the state. The state wants to see decreasing infant mortality rates and declining morbidity rates. It takes a terrible toll on the families and exacts a high cost from the system. The Institute emphasizes public information, getting the word out to Bedouins, especially women, about the availability of services. Notwithstanding the incentive to gather more DNA samples, Dr. Burke and his counselors state the aim isn't to lift the number of tests, but for more women to be aware of the existence of testing and the option of using it. Some Bedouin women expressed a contrary outlook on bringing them the good word about genetic testing and the possibility of abortion. You want fewer Bedouin children. In the universe of demographic politics, this charge registers loudly. But there are also Bedouins and Arabs who give workshops on health matters, including the hazards of hereditary diseases. Dr. Khalil al-Badur, a lecturer from the Ben-Gurion Medical Faculty who coordinates meetings with the Bedouin community, says, "I can't tell them not to marry their cousins because they're not going to stop doing that. The most important thing is that young couples have started getting tested prior to getting married to see if both are carriers of the same mutation. The message when the tests point to increased risk, don't marry this cousin, marry a different cousin." How frequently such advice is followed is not known, but the outcome of another approach suggests not often. In 2001, a project was launched to gather comprehensive DNA information for a village with a high frequency of hereditary diseases. The aim was to set up a database which would allow individuals to discover whether they were genetically suitable before committing to marriage. The team gathered 230 samples, but few of those tested ever came to learn the results. A possible reason is that a stigma attaches to being a carrier, especially for a woman. One of the critics of the project to identify the potential for deafness among Bedouins is Shifra Kish, a Dutch PhD candidate in anthropology whose dissertation questions reduction of congenital deafness as a given. She sees a problem with priorities. In her view, deafness is simply a condition requiring a different language. If only a small part of the budget was invested in high school education, if young women knew how to read and write Arabic, they would be able to read what it says on the medicine labels. Educated women have more influence on their lives, and then they don't need to have emissaries sent to explain what's good or bad for them. People would have the freedom to make decisions about their lives, about their health. They could determine their own personal and cultural priorities. Marrying a relative does raise the likelihood of producing an abnormal child, but the risk is still fairly low. The most rare disorder occurs at a rate of 1 in 1,000, while kidney problems appear in 59 of 1,000 births. The infant mortality rate among Bedouins is 15.3 for every 1,000 live births, while in the general population the rate is 3.3 per 1,000. The extent to which congenital defects account for this difference is under debate. Dr. Daniela Landau, a neonatal specialist at Soroka, states that of the babies born with congenital problems, about a third of the cases can be attributed to hereditary disorders. On the other hand, Orly Almi of Physicians for Human Rights says, by focusing on hereditary diseases, the state exempts itself from having to hold a meaningful discussion of the other problems, which are environmental problems related to trash collection, lack of electricity, lack of running water, the total lack of infrastructure and services. It also places the responsibility on the primitive population. The state is essentially saying, this problem isn't our fault, it's because of your culture. Ismail Abu Sa'ad, a professor of education at Ben Gurion and the chair of the steering committee of the university's Center for the Study of Bedouin Society, says, it's very easy to say that these are the customs and your genes and it's hereditary. They're basically saying that the Bedouin, not the conditions they live in, are to blame for the infant mortality rate. Other shortcomings have also been pointed out. The Institute has only one Arabic-speaking counselor, and the consent forms for testing are in Hebrew. An Arab sociologist, Arabia Mansour, whose work in the Negev is dedicated to bettering health conditions and empowerment of women, observes a conflict of interest for Israel. Where the investment really needs to be made is in the basic physical infrastructure. The state has enacted plenty of progressive legislation, but none of it reaches beyond the edge of the desert, which the state, while it makes a pretense of liberalism, tries to preserve as a fertile research area. Nowhere in the discussion that I have thus far seen and heard has anybody remarked on the irony of Israel investing its national wealth in a program that might, fairly or unfairly, be characterized eugenics light.